Okay, I don't even know where to begin. So I'll say thank you. Thank everybody who watched that last video about the Dreamcast. I'm shocked at holy cow, how many people have watched it. That's crazy. Even more crazy is the sheer number of comments on that last video. To have almost 1,000 comments on here is daunting and awesome. I'm very excited. One of the coolest things about these comments are the number of people who recognized Golden Boy. The fact that people responded positively to it. That anime is over 25 years old and still has some of the best cutaways in the business. Absolutely love Golden Boy, even though I cannot recommend it to everybody. It is problematic. So that's number one. Number two is when I mentioned my top 5 consoles of all time, I do not mean that they are the best consoles of all time. I don't mean they're the top selling consoles of all time. I don't mean they should be ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, they're just my favorite consoles of all time. I work to clarify that with a few people. With all due respect, how is the 3DO in your top 5 consoles of all time? My guy places a Goldstar and Colecovision in his top 5, but no PS2 or NES. 3DO in top 5 consoles? Bold choice. ColecoVision is your number 1 console of all time? Your taste is in your butt, buddy.
I'm not your buddy, friend.
So let me explain. In my top 5 consoles of all time, I have the Dreamcast, of course. And then there's also the Panasonic GameCube. That's in there. I have the PS1, I have the Goldstar 3DO, and I have the ColecoVision. This is my top 5 consoles. And here's why. You just watched the Dreamcast video. You saw how I was tethered to that console. I had a foot in how that was brought into the United States. And that's a great story. Those make me feel good. I remember how that felt. These other consoles have a similar feeling. The GameCube. A lot of people do not look at the GameCube fondly. In the industry, they were saying, well, this is Nintendo's misstep. After the Nintendo 64, they didn't know what was going on. The GameCube was a phenomenal machine. What they did with Resident Evil on that console, it was a monster. We had Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on that platform that you could hook up your Game Boy Advance. We had Eternal Darkness, M-rated games on the platform that are still some of the best games of the day. I wound up acquiring a Panasonic GameCube Q. It was very much like the 3DO, where Nintendo licensed the hardware out to somebody else to manufacture a product, and this product looked like it was either a retro 50s toaster or from the future. Everybody that came over, it was a conversation piece. I had my own game store at the time. People were coming in to take a look at it, like moth to the flame. Like, people were curious about it. That's great. When was the last time you heard of a console that was designed so interestingly that people would come in to get a look at this thing that's there? GameCube was really cool, but this one, even more so. The PS1 was one that I could bring on trips with my kids. We had that hooked up. They could play games in the car. That was great. But I also managed to figure out how to hook other consoles into it. It had an AV unit in the back, so I was able to use the PS1 screen to play Final Fantasy XII on my nightstand. I was able to finish a ton of games because, again, I had newborns. And so having that console, that was about 5 years of my life playing that console on my nightstand. It didn't move. I just plugged different consoles into it and used that as my bedside television. So I love the PlayStation 1 for that, because this PlayStation 1 had added functionality that allowed me to enjoy even more games. Absolutely loved it. That is why that is in my top 5. Listen, I have pretty much every console since the NES on, any major console I have purchased, and I still own many of them. So why these two? Why the 3DO and why the ColecoVision? Let's start with the ColecoVision first. The console industry as we know it started in the US Sure, there was Pong, there was Magnavox Odyssey, there was a lot of these like Telstar type devices. But the Atari, the cartridge-based system, was really the big start. So I most likely got an Atari between 1979 and 1980, and it was great. It was a great family console. We played Combat, my brother and I, we played Maze Craze, again, one of my favorite games. I had a lot of good times with the Atari, but it was very weak. Could not do a lot. And when you're going to the arcade and you're seeing Popeye, you're seeing Pac-Man, you're seeing these incredible games with a lot of moving sprites, and then you come home and you see this, that doesn't translate. That's bad. So I started getting a little bit tired of the Atari and what it couldn't do. So you'd see in television, and television had some decent games, could move a few more sprites. But then when the Colecovision came out, it had nearly an arcade-perfect version of Donkey Kong. I know it's not arcade-perfect, but I know in a kid's mind, that looks pretty darn close. That's amazing. That's what we wanted. We wanted the arcade experience at home. And I did the thing that most kids do, where before I had my ColecoVision, every project at school had to do with the ColecoVision. Like, I was obsessed with this console. And when I got it, it did not disappoint. The ColecoVision had incredible looking games. Games like Venture, games like Zaxxon, games like Frenzy. So many fantastic looking games. I still play Mr. Do this day. I love that game, and it's mainly because of the ColecoVision. When the industry did crash in 1983, a lot of the Atari stuff was liquidated. People like KB Toys and Toys R Us could not wait to get rid of this stuff. So when I had my ColecoVision, I was able to collect a lot of games on the cheap. A lot of these games were just liquidated. Get them out of here. So I got to play a ton of, like before I was getting $29 to $49 for a game. Now where it's like $4 to $5.
We're retailing it for $79.99. Originally it was $139.99.
Between 1983 and 1985, I played a metric ton of ColecoVision games. But yeah, ColecoVision, awesome. You can be like, what? You just try to be contrarian or whatever. No. The 3DO, for everybody who just says the 3DO is $700, it was and it wasn't. I owned the Panasonic FZ1, and it broke twice. I got it from Incredible Universe in Wilsonville, Oregon, and I had to return it twice. That's why I wound up with the Goldstar version, which is now LG. Lucky Goldstar. Anybody know that? Probably everybody knew that. Goldstar is now LG, and that still works to this day. Awesome, knock on wood. So that was the launch price of the Goldstar 3DO, $399. So the ads you see for $699 have one pack-in included, or sometimes had a bundle of games included. That was a suggestion to retailers to make the system look more enticing.
Excellent!
Good lord. But the reason why it was so expensive, because a lot of these companies get the system out at a loss and wind up recouping that through game sales. Nintendo, on the cartridge-based systems, was making $20 per cart. Every game that sold for $40, $20 of that already went to Nintendo. So the developers didn't have much say. The 3DO reversed that, where they passed the cost of the system on to the buyer. That would be the consumer. So developers could get more money for each game they brought out, which would bring more games out. Or they could price them at $20. They could price them at $25, whatever they had to. But yeah, it really put a lot more money in developers' pockets, because that's what Trip Hawkins believed. And how crazy is this? The day that I'm recording this is the 30th anniversary of the launch of the 3DO in several markets, I believe UK and Japan. Yeah, the 3DO was great for developers. It had some of the greatest games. When people were saying, like, what games were on it? Freaking Road Rash with CD audio from Soundgarden and freaking Paw and some, like, bands of the time. Need for Speed, the first one from Road and Track, absolutely stellar. in comparison from where we came from. I think the last racing game I had played was Jaguar XJ220.
Stop! He's already dead!
Going to Road & Track's Need for Speed was astronomical in the jump. Star Control 2, the sequel to Star Control on the Sega Genesis, Star Control 2, with CD sound, interplanetary travel, full audio, full voice acting.
Well, it's about damn time.
That's on the 3DO. You had Cannon Fodder. You had Alone in the Dark 1 and 2. You had Another World, which is it was called Out of This World on Super NES and on other platforms, but Another World is what it's known as now. I think that's the universal title. Crystal Dynamics was rocking it. Not only did they have Gex, but they had like Crash and Burn. But when you look at the 3DO next to what was available at the time, absolutely massive difference between the two. Oh my god, FIFA Soccer, another one that you would put on in the store and just be blown away by it. Like the Dreamcast with NFL 2K, FIFA Soccer, sound, visuals were knocking people's socks off if you were showing that. And perhaps the greatest game that nobody talks about. This is the biggest shame of it all. The 3DO is so good. And this game did release on the PlayStation to no fanfare. If any, I mean, I was working at the stores at the time. I could not sell this game to save my life. If anybody here on YouTube has played Return Fire, raise your hand. Please send me a comment. That game needs to be rebuilt. Absolutely incredible capture the flag game on the 3DO. Before Resident Evil was a thing, Alone in the Dark was a thing. But there was a 3DO game that was even closer to Resident Evil than Alone in the Dark. But Shinji Mikami was on record saying that Alone in the Dark realized it could be done. Oh, what am I talking about? The greatest freaking arcade perfect version of Street Fighter 2 with Q sound. Just unreal. And then you had the scaling. If you looked at the Super NES version of Samurai Showdown and put it side by side with the 3DO version, dear God. Like, you can see how much of a leap this was. Like, this is almost as big a leap as going from Atari to Colecovision. The 3DO was capable of producing 3D scaling in the same way that Neo Geo carts that were selling for hundreds of dollars. The 3DO was a beast of a machine, and it was made by Trip Hawkins, who is a legend who created Electronic Arts, and R.J. Michael. The man is a freaking genius. Okay, his Wikipedia is so tiny. I'm embarrassed. He contributed to the design of the Amiga computer in '85, the Atari Lynx, the color handheld, the 3DO, and he worked at Williams Electronics and built Sinistar. From handhelds to arcades to consoles. And the Wikipedia page is an affront to me and to R.J. Michael. It's embarrassing. The console was full of great games. We did a top 50 games of all time list. In that top 50, I believe I had 6 3DO games. I wonder where Return Fire is in my top games of all time. It might be top 20. Hang on a sec. Where's Return Fire? That seems unfair. It's in my top 50 games of all time, but it's way too low. If this channel takes off, I am going to make sure that game gets redone. But what do I know? I'm just an old man drinking his tea, making videos on YouTube. That's all. I wanted to clear that up. I'm working on 2 new videos right now, thanks to you. I didn't even know if anybody was watching, but this has been the greatest 2 weeks of my YouTube life, and I can't thank you enough. I'm so excited. That doesn't happen very often. I appreciate everything. I'm on this ride as long as I can be, but I appreciate every bit. Thank you, everyone. See you in the next one. The absolute worst version of Doom ever made. Good Lord. It's like me arguing the case. I didn't murder 8 people. I murdered 6 people. Awesome. Thank God. I thought I wasn't recording. That would have been terrible.